1. The rain at arrivals. The automatic doors slid open, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the cold air, it was the rain. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was the kind of steady, soaking downpour that made every step feel heavier, like the sky had decided to share in my grief, drop by drop. I pulled my hood up, though it didn't do much. The fabric was already damp from the walk through the terminal. My suitcase wheels stuttered over the uneven pavement, splashing through small puddles forming in the cracks. I glanced down at my phone. The family group chat was still open, the last few lines glowing against the dark screen. Me. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? Brian. My brother, we're swamped. Book a ride. Mom. Should have planned ahead. The sting wasn't in the words themselves. It was in the speed they'd replied. No hesitation. No, sorry, we can't. Just blunt, transactional sentences, like they were replying to a wrong number. I stood there for a moment under a flickering streetlight, my suitcase beside me like some sad little companion. All around, people were hurrying past, families with flowers, couples embracing under umbrellas, kids squealing as they spotted grandparents. My eyes followed a young man as he ran to hug an older woman, spinning her once before setting her down. Her laughter rang through the wet night air. I didn't even notice my hand tightening around my phone until I felt my knuckles ache. I wanted to believe there was a reason. Maybe Mom had a doctor's appointment. Maybe Brian was stuck in traffic or working late. But the truth was, I'd seen this pattern before. Too many times. Times when I dropped everything for them, without thinking, without asking for anything in return. And somehow, when it was my turn to need help, there was always a reason they couldn't. The rain rolled down my cheeks, warm at first from the heat of my skin, then cold as it lingered. My husband used to pull me close under his coat on nights like this, making jokes about how it looked like a walking tent. I could almost feel the weight of his arm over my shoulders, the steady heartbeat against my side. But that was gone now, buried thousands of miles away in a small cemetery with no one but me to stand and say goodbye. The sharp blast of a car horn snapped me out of the memory. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, wipers squeaking across the windshield. A teenage girl in a varsity jacket hopped out, squealing when she saw her dad behind the wheel. She dashed into the car, her father leaning over to pull the door shut quickly so she wouldn't get soaked. I checked the time. 5:37 p.m. The last airport shuttle to my part of town left in 20 minutes. My first instinct was to text Mom again, maybe soften my request, make it sound like I understood. But I caught myself. I wasn't going to beg for a ride from people who couldn't be bothered in the first place. I typed 2 words instead. It's okay. Then I hit send before I could change my mind. Almost immediately, the little scene indicator appeared under my message. No reply. A gust of wind blew sideways rain into my face, and I turned slightly, shielding my eyes. A man nearby struggled to keep his umbrella from flipping inside out. His wife clutched his arm, laughing at the awkward dance they were doing with it. The sound should have been cheerful, but it felt like salt in a wound. I decided to move toward the bus stop at the far end of the lot. My sneakers squelched with every step, the water already seeping in. The path was lined with yellowed streetlights, their glow blurring in the rain. My suitcase rattled behind me, hitting small potholes that sent vibrations up my arm. Halfway there, I passed a man standing beside an overloaded luggage cart. He looked lost, glancing between his phone and the empty road. "Taxi strike tonight," he muttered to no one in particular when our eyes met. I nodded, not slowing down. I didn't have the energy to talk. At the bus shelter, the plastic roof dripped steadily at the corners. A small group of travelers huddled inside, shuffling to make space for me. A woman in a long gray coat offered a tired smile. I returned it faintly, then pulled my phone out again, not to check for replies, but to scroll through the old photos I couldn't bring myself to delete. One caught me off guard. Our anniversary dinner from 2 years ago. My husband holding up a glass of wine, the candlelight soft against his face. My chest tightened, the air in my lungs suddenly too thick. I quickly swiped past it, my thumb trembling. The bus arrived in a hiss of brakes and a splash of dirty water. People moved forward, climbing on one by one. I lingered near the back of the line, my fingers tapping against my suitcase handle. Through the wet glass, I could see the driver leaning over to punch tickets. As I stepped onto the bus, a voice called out from behind me, rough, impatient. "Miss, are you getting on or not?" It was the driver, noticing my hesitation. I forced a nod, climbed the steps, and took a seat near the window. The rain streaked down the glass in endless lines, distorting the lights of the terminal until they looked like melting stars. As the bus pulled away, I glanced back at the arrivals area. Couples still embraced under umbrellas. Families still laughed over luggage carts. It felt like I was leaving an entire world behind, one I didn't belong to anymore. The hum of the engine filled the silence around me. No new messages, no apologies, just the quiet hum of tires on wet asphalt and the occasional cough from another passenger. I leaned my head against the cool glass, watching the rain race sideways as the city lights grew closer. And for the first time that night, I stopped hoping they'd change their minds. A family's silence. The bus rattled on, its low hum filling the spaces where conversation should have been. Every bump in the road sent a faint shiver through my seat. I watched the raindrops chase each other across the window, trying not to think about my phone lying silent in my lap. When the driver pulled up to my stop, the air outside was colder than before. The wind had picked up, tugging at the edges of my hood as I stepped down onto the slick pavement. My shoes made a soft suction sound as they peeled away from the wet ground. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. A few porch lights glowed faintly in the distance, halos in the mist. My apartment building stood at the far end of the street, a squat brick structure that had seen better decades. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers stiff from the cold. Inside, the heat was barely doing its job, but it felt like a relief anyway. I rolled my suitcase into the living room, letting it sit in the corner like an uninvited guest. The silence pressed in immediately. No television hum, no ticking clock, just the faint drip of water from my coat onto the hardwood floor. I slipped off my shoes and sank onto the couch. My phone was still in my hand. Against my better judgment, I opened the family group chat again. The little green circle next to Mom's name told me she was online. She'd seen my "it's okay" hours ago. Still nothing. The longer I stared at that blank screen, the more the memory of her last words grew sharper. Should have planned ahead. Not "are you okay?" Not "how was the flight?" Just a quiet jab disguised as advice. A sudden ping broke the stillness, but it wasn't from Mom or Brian. It was my cousin Jenna. "Jenna, hey, heard you got back tonight. How are you holding up?" I didn't answer right away. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't decide if I wanted to open that door. If Jenna had heard, it meant Mom or Brian had told her, which meant they were talking about me, just not to me. Finally, I typed, "I'm fine. Just tired." Her reply came almost instantly. "If you need anything, I'm around." I mean it. I wanted to believe her. But right then, I couldn't shake the thought that, it was just something people said. The apartment felt colder. I got up, turned the heat up a notch, and went into the kitchen. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. I poured a glass of water, sat at the small table, and tried to focus on anything else. But my mind kept cycling back to the same image. Mom at home, phone in hand, choosing not to type a single word. I don't know how long I sat there before the phone buzzed again. This time it was Brian. "Brian, you made it home okay?" It wasn't an apology. Not even close. I stayed at the message, my jaw tightening. After everything, after the miles traveled, the funeral, the rain, they waited until hours later to check in. I typed back, "Yeah. Got in fine." No emojis. No question for him. Just the truth. Cut short. The read receipt popped up immediately. Then nothing. I carried my water back to the couch, sat down, and pulled the blanket over my lap. My body felt heavy, but my mind was wired, caught somewhere between anger and exhaustion. I told myself not to read too much into it, that maybe they were distracted. busy. But deep down, I knew better. My husband used to say that silence was its own kind of answer. Sitting there, I finally understood what he meant. The phone lit up again, this time with a picture in the group chat. It was from Mom. A photo of Hi and Brian at a diner. Plates piled high with pancakes and bacon. No caption, just the smiling faces I hadn't seen in months. My stomach turned. They'd been together tonight. Not swamped. Not too busy. Just together. Choosing breakfast for dinner over being at the arrival's curb. I locked my phone without responding. The heater clicked on with a low groan, pushing a wave of lukewarm air across the room. I pulled the blanket tighter and closed my eyes, but even then, the image of that diner photo stayed with me. I could almost hear the clink of their coffee mugs, the low murmur of their conversation, the kind you only share with people you actually want to be around. A sudden knock at the door made me jolt. I hesitated, glancing at the peephole. It was Mrs. Parker from across the hall, her raincoat still dripping. "Just wanted to check on you," she said when I opened the door. "Saw you come in earlier. You looked like you'd had a long day." I managed a small smile. Something like that. She offered me a container of soup, homemade, by the smell of it. For when you get hungry, it's chicken and noodles. Good for cold nights. It was such a simple gesture, but it caught me off guard. My throat felt tight as I took it from her. Thank you. Really. When she left, I set the container on the counter and stood there for a moment, staring at it. One neighbor I barely knew had shown me more kindness tonight than my own family. Back on the couch, I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and let the quiet settle in again. This time, it felt different. Not empty, exactly, just telling. Like the kind of silence you get when you finally stop knocking on a door that isn't going to open. I thought about texting Mom one more time. Something short. A question, maybe, or even a joke. But my fingers didn't move. Instead, I turned the phone face down and let it buzz against the fabric when Jenna's name lit up again. Outside, the rain kept falling, softer now. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but soaks everything just the same. And in that stillness, I understood that the quiet from my family wasn't going to break. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The long way home. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time I decided I couldn't sit in that apartment any longer. The silence was starting to feel like a living thing, wrapping itself around me. I grabbed my coat and stepped back outside, locking the door behind me. The street was darker now, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the glow of the streetlights. My breath rose in faint clouds as I walked toward the bus stop at the corner. I didn't know exactly where I was going. Just that staying still felt unbearable. At the shelter, a man in a baseball cap sat hunched over, sipping from a paper cup. He looked up briefly as I approached, nodding once before turning his gaze back to the empty road. The bench was wet, so I stayed standing, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. The bus arrived late, brakes squealing as it pulled in. Inside, it smelled faintly of damp wool and old coffee. I found a seat toward the back, placing my bag beside me. The other passengers looked worn, 2 women in work uniforms speaking softly, a man tapping at his phone with furrowed brows. As we rolled through the city, the familiar streets felt almost foreign. The shop windows were dark, except for a late-night laundromat where a lone man folded shirts in slow, methodical movements. A memory stayed, my husband and I sitting in a laundromat years ago, reading magazines while our clothes spun. The corners of my mouth lifted, just for a second, before the ache returned. At the next stop, an older woman boarded, shaking rain from her scarf. She looked around, then motioned to the seat beside me. "Mind if I sit?" "Not at all," I said, moving my bag. She settled in with a sigh. "Buses are a blessing when you don't drive anymore," she murmured. "But they sure take their time." I smiled faintly. Guess it's why they call it public transportation, not public speeding. Her soft laugh surprised me. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the hum of the engine filling the space between us. Then she glanced at me, tilting her head. "You coming back from Wyke?" "From the airport," I said. "Just got in today." Her eyes warmed. "That's always a long day. Someone pick you up?" The question hung there, harmless on the surface. I could have lied, said yes, but the truth came out instead. No, had to make my own way. She studied me for a moment, not prying, but with the kind of understanding that doesn't need details. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people show you who they are by what they don't do." I nodded, my throat tight. She didn't press further, and I was grateful. We reached the end of the line, and I stepped out into a quieter part of town. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the air heavy with the smell of wet pavement. I decided to walk the next stretch rather than wait for a transfer. The sidewalks glistened under the streetlights, and puddles reflected distorted shapes of passing cars. I passed a small diner with neon letters that buzzed faintly. Through the fogged windows, I could see a man in a booth flipping through a newspaper, steam curling up from a mug of coffee. For a moment, I thought about going in, ordering something warm, letting the noise of dishes and quiet chatter fill the empty spaces in my head. But my feet kept moving. Halfway down the block, I heard quick footsteps behind me. My pulse jumped, but when I glanced over my shoulder, it was just a teenager in a hoodie, earbuds in, hurrying past. I let out the breath I'd been holding. The long walk gave me too much time to think. About the funeral, about the flight home, about the moment I stepped through those airport doors, half hoping, half knowing no one would be there. The farther I went, the heavier those thoughts felt, like the damp air itself was pressing down on me. At another bus stop, I sat on the edge of the bench, resting my hands on my knees. A poster on the side of the shelter advertised a family event at the community center, smiling faces, kids with painted cheeks. It struck me how something so ordinary could feel so distant, like it belonged to a world I wasn't part of anymore. When the next bus came, I climbed aboard and found a seat near the middle. The driver greeted each passenger with a nod, and I realized how much I appreciated that small acknowledgement. The ride was longer this time, weaving through side streets. At one point, we stopped at a red light beside a playground. The swings moved slightly in the wind, their chains clinking softly. The sight pulled up another memory, me and my husband sitting on those swings late at night, talking about nothing and everything. We were younger then, the future still wide open. The bus jolted forward, pulling me back into the present. A few stops later, a man with a guitar case boarded and sat near the front. He didn't play, just kept one hand resting on the case as if it was something precious. I found myself wondering where he was going, who might be waiting for him. By the time I reached my street again, the walk had eased some of the weight inside me. Not gone, but shifted, less sharp, more like a dull ache. I stepped off the bus and started toward home, passing a row of darkened houses. A single window glowed in one of them, and through it I saw an elderly couple sitting at a table, leaning toward each other as they spoke. It made me think of how simple it could be, just showing up for someone, even if all you had to offer was your presence. When I finally reached my building, the familiar creak of the front door greeted me. Inside, the air felt warmer than before. I hung up my coat and set my bag down, the quiet settling around me again. But this time, it didn't feel quite as suffocating. I poured the soup Mrs. Parker had given me into a pot and set it on the stove. The smell of chicken and herbs filled the small kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of rain still clinging to my clothes. I stood there, listening to the gentle simmer, and realized that even on the long way home, there were small moments worth noticing. Moments that didn't depend on anyone else showing up. What the news showed. The front door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt too final, like it had locked me into something I wasn't ready to face. The hallway was still and dim, carrying that faint, stale scent of a house that hasn't been lived in for a while. My shoes left faint, wet marks across the hardwood as I stepped inside, the rain still dripping from my coat. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only noise in the house, and it made the silence feel heavier. My fingers found the remote on the side table almost instinctively. Maybe I just needed some noise, something to keep my mind from replaying the last few hours on a loop. The TV flickered to life. The colors on the screen flashed across the room, casting shadows that moved like restless ghosts against the walls. A news anchor was mid-sentence, their voice sharp, polished, and carrying that rehearsed urgency that made everything sound like the world was teetering on the edge. And this footage, obtained just hours ago, has left authorities stunned. I wasn't listening at first. My coat was half off, my mind half distracted. But then the screen changed. The grainy video filled the frame, an aerial view at first, like it had been taken from a drone. Then it zoomed in. I froze, my coat still hanging from one shoulder. It was my parents' street. The news banner running across the bottom of the screen read, "Unexpected police activity in quiet suburban neighborhood." The camera angle shifted, showing a row of squad cars lined up along the curb. Their lights pulsed in the rain, red and blue bouncing off wet pavement. The camera zoomed again, and my chest tightened. It wasn't just the street. It was the house. Our house. My father's car was parked in the driveway, exactly where it had always been. The garage door was closed. 2 officers stood near the front porch, speaking to someone I couldn't see. A 3rd officer stepped into the frame, holding a small evidence bag. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the anchor's voice cut in again. Sources tell us this is part of an ongoing investigation. Details remain scarce, but neighbors describe a tense atmosphere in the last several days. Authorities have not confirmed whether any arrests have been made. My mind raced. Arrests? Investigation. This didn't make sense. My parents had their flaws, but this was something entirely different. I sank into the couch without meaning to, my coat crumpling beside me. The footage cut to a neighbor being interviewed, Mrs. Klein from across the street. She was wrapped in a pink robe, her hair in curlers, speaking like she'd been waiting years for the chance to be on television. "They've been so quiet lately," she said, glancing back toward the flashing lights. "Almost too quiet. I thought maybe they were just keeping to themselves. But last night, well, I heard shouting. Not like them at all." I rubbed a hand over my face. Shouting? I hadn't heard shouting the last time I'd been near the house. And yet, something in her tone made it sound like the kind of shouting that left marks. The footage jumped again, now a close-up of the front door as officers stepped inside. The angle was shaky, clearly shot by someone on their phone. Through the partially open door, I caught a flash of the hallway wallpaper I'd grown up staring at. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and twisted something deep. I muted the TV. The silence that followed was almost worse. My mind filled in the blanks the news hadn't given me. What could they possibly be looking for? Why now? And why hadn't anyone called me? I stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The world looked blurred, as though everything beyond the glass was being hidden on purpose. I didn't want to admit it, but a small part of me wondered if this was connected to me somehow. If my leaving, my decisions, had triggered some chain reaction I didn't understand yet. A sudden knock at my door made me flinch. 3 short raps. Not tentative, confident. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to ignore it. But when I peeked through the peephole, all I saw was a man in a dark jacket, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap. When I opened the door, he smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You live here?" he asked, his voice calm but clipped. "Yeah, why?" He glanced past me into the dim living room, his gaze landing briefly on the muted TV. "I think you might want to know. Your parents were taken in for questioning tonight." The words didn't land all at once. I heard them, understood them, but they seemed to hang in the air like they were waiting for permission to sink in. "For what?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He shook his head slightly. "Can't say. Not my place. Just thought you'd want to hear it from someone who was there." "Who are you?" He didn't answer directly, just tipped his cap, turned, and walked down the hall toward the building's exit. His shoes squeaked faintly against the tile. I stood in the doorway until he disappeared from view, the rain-streaked street outside swallowing him whole. Then I shut the door and locked it, twice. When I looked back at the TV, the footage had shifted to another story, something about a city council meeting, but my parents' house still hovered in my mind like a ghost image burned into my vision. I sat back down slowly, the cushions exhaling beneath me. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, as if waiting for me to pick it up. I thought about calling them. I thought about calling the station. But every time I imagined the conversation, I couldn't decide if I was afraid of hearing the truth, or of confirming that the silence between us had just become permanent. Outside, the mist turned back into a steady drizzle. The sound of it against the windows was almost like static, a constant, low hum that matched the unsettled noise in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure if going home was even possible anymore. Not in the way I'd always imagined it. Walking away for good 1,000 words. The rain had stopped by the time I stepped outside, but the air was still heavy, thick with that dampness that lingers after a storm. The street lights threw pale circles onto the wet pavement, reflecting faint gold against puddles that trembled with every distant car passing. I pulled my coat tighter, the news segment still replaying in my mind like an unwanted echo I couldn't turn off. I didn't even remember locking the door. My feet carried me forward on instinct, away from the glow of the living room, away from the stale air of that house. The sound of my own footsteps on the wet sidewalk was strangely loud, almost accusing, like they wanted me to answer for something. A familiar road stretched ahead, but it felt foreign now, lined with houses I'd passed 1,000 times before without a second thought. Windows glowed warm in the distance, families laughing, dinners shared, television chatter spilling faintly through the glass. The sight made my chest ache, and not with nostalgia. Halfway down the block, I saw him, Mr. Alvarez, leaning against his gate with a cigarette, just like he always did after dark. He spotted me and straightened, his brows knitting in concern. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice low but cutting through the quiet. I forced a small nod. "Yeah, just needed some air." His eyes lingered on me, like he didn't believe it, but he didn't press. Instead, he tapped the ash from his cigarette, muttered something about the weather, and turned back to the shadows of his porch. By the time I reached the corner store, I wasn't even sure why I'd walked there. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed faintly, too bright against the night. I wandered the aisles without purpose, running my fingers along the edge of a dusty cereal box. The clerk barely looked up from his phone as I passed him on the way out. Outside, the night was darker. The clouds had returned, swallowing the moon, and the street felt emptier somehow, like the world had pulled back just enough to leave me standing alone. I kept walking, past the old bus stop where I used to wait for school, past the park where I once scraped my knees on the cracked slide. Every corner I turned seemed to bring back something I tried to leave behind, and tonight, it all felt sharper. A cold wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. It cut through my coat, through the layers I'd built around myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't look. I already knew who it wasn't. 2 blocks later, I stopped in front of a house I hadn't meant to find. Ours. The porch light was off, curtains drawn, no sound from inside. My throat tightened, the weight of 100 unspoken words pressing down until breathing felt like work. I stood there longer than I should have, my hand twitching toward the gate, then falling back to my side. This wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. "Don't!" I whispered to myself, barely audible over the wind. Turning away felt like moving through water, slow and heavy. But with every step, the pressure in my chest loosened, just enough to keep going. I didn't look back. The streets opened up ahead, leading toward the quieter part of town. I passed a small cafe, its sign flickering, the smell of coffee drifting through the door as a couple stepped out laughing. Their warmth didn't reach me. My mind was still tangled in the noise of earlier, in the image of that news broadcast, In the truth, it had pulled to the surface. Somewhere near the edge of town, I found myself by the river. The water was swollen from the rain, churning under the dim orange of the bridge lights. I leaned on the railing, the metal cold beneath my palms, and let the rush of the current drown out everything else. The truth was, I could stay here for hours. No one would notice. No one would call. The thought wasn't sad anymore. It was just fact. I thought about the years I'd spent chasing something I couldn't name. Approval, maybe, or belonging. But the more I chased, the further it got, until all I had was scraps of moments that never fit together. Standing there, the wind pulling at my coat, I realized I didn't want to keep chasing. Walking away for good didn't mean slamming doors or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it was this, a quiet time, a decision made in the stillness, a refusal to keep stepping back into the same fire expecting it not to burn. The air smelled cleaner near the river. I took one last look at the dark water, then turned toward the road that would take me anywhere but back. A car passed, its headlights sweeping over me for a brief second, and I caught my reflection in the glass of a shop window, a little older, a little worn. But still here. That was enough. I walked until the streets changed, until the houses thinned out and the sound of the river faded. My steps felt lighter, even as the night deepened around me. Somewhere ahead, there'd be a place to stop, to breathe, to start something that was mine alone. And this time, I wouldn't be coming back.